Ada Wong's campaign is intended to weave together the events of the 3 prior campaigns and tie up any loose plot threads. As a result, that means you'll be retreading a lot of familiar ground and repeating sections of levels you've already played. This includes boss fights, puzzles, and obstacles. Even the most annoying or frustrating. The difference here is that Ada is all alone unless you're playing in co-op. The player can no longer rely on an AI partner bailing them out of a rough situation. In order to make up for this, the majority of Ada's campaign focuses on smaller scale firefights or large obstacle course style set pieces. Some are assembled and executed well, while others leave a lot to be desired. For example, the stealth segments, while taking some getting used to, are acceptable. A player is given plenty of opportunity to sneak up on a foe as long as they are patient. Ada's crossbow also makes for an excellent weapon to make quick work of opponents from a long distance without being noticed. But sometimes the game chooses to instead throw a never-ending wave of enemies at Ada, or positions her in an inconvenient location. The end of the first chapter makes both of these mistakes, and while delivering key plot dialogue at that. Droves of enemies come from multiple angles while the game waits for the player to follow a button prompt, one that won't appear while aiming down a weapon's sights. This means a player may find themselves wondering why the game won't simply continue on, desperately trying to take out any foes surrounding them. The best reason I can imagine Capcom chose to do this is to either make sure the player is following along, in which case why have story important content in the middle of a frantic firefight, or to simply be more interactive. It succeeds at neither, and simply becomes an additional frustration for the player. The obstacle courses are mostly well designed and executed, they simply rely on the player running forward until a button prompt appears. Things only go south when a sudden and surprisingly demanding QuickTime event appears, with a good chance of resulting in a predictable demise. Perhaps the real highlight of Ada's campaign are the few moments where her isolation is used as a callback to earlier games. The first 2 missions each have rooms and puzzles that capture the old Resident Evil atmosphere, only combined with Resident Evil 4's more action-focused nature. It's a great way to break up the otherwise non-stop action while providing something new, something different than the previous 3 campaigns had achieved. The helicopter, meanwhile, is what is bound to steal the show for most players, pitting them in the pilot's seat to take down other aerial assailants, gunning down Simmons, and clearing zombies off of a skyscraper roof. True, it doesn't really do anything more than empower the player, aside from the surprisingly challenging attack helicopter, but nevertheless, the feeling of near invincibility is why the moment is so memorable, considering how much of the game is spent getting knocked onto your back by a stray bullet or two. It is also key to note that the helicopter follows up what is perhaps the worst designed fight in all of Resident Evil 6. The conflict against Carla, the real identity behind evil Ada, primarily consists of an obstacle course where you have to try to avoid, and inevitably fail, being grabbed by the ooze decorating the hull of the ship. This eventually leads into a battle with the mutation of Carla's face. A player's gaze will naturally be drawn to the glowing red eyes, a telltale sign in the Resident Evil universe of an enemy weak point. However, simply shooting the eyes will yield no progress. You see, once the eyes have been destroyed, the player is intended to shoot at the mouth, despite having no clear indication to do so. There is nothing that screams, "This is the next step," just the mouth opening and closing. Considering how many animations are always going on, a player may easily assume that this is just another meaningless action to make Carla seem more alive. The obvious, color-contrasting weak point that the player has been trained to seek out is now nowhere to be seen. While each of the previous campaigns provides some form of unique experience, something to bring to the table, Ada's is a mere mishmash of encounters, obstacles, and QuickTime events already experienced. The only reason to really play through Ada's adventure is to hopefully figure out what is going on. I thought I had followed along with the events of Ada's campaign and its story. I thought I had figured out what was going on. Turns out, however, based on information you unlock finding those serpent badges, which in turn open up files in the extras menu, as well as a variety of wikis if you don't have the damn patience for that, I learned that what I thought was happening simply made too much sense. I had projected a better story onto Resident Evil 6 than what had actually happened, and the only way you discover what really happened is to find all of those badges and read all of those unlocked files. So what did I think happened? Well, I thought Ada, notorious for snatching virus samples for shady companies, had worked with Simmons and Carla on this new form of the virus. I thought that after Ada had left the operation, Simmons had Carla turn into a doppelganger of Ada Wong. This was so they could frame Ada as the head of terrorist organization Neo Umbrella after setting off bioorganic weapons in Eastern Europe, the USA, and China. I thought that Carla, in an effort to get revenge on Simmons and Ada together for this fate, would bring Ada into the entire scenario to witness her downfall firsthand. I thought that both Simmons and Carla had gone mad from the viral infection, as is typical of this franchise, and Ada eliminates any and all evidence of her involvement while also destroying all of Simmons and Carla's research. Despite being as convoluted as you might expect of the franchise, this is not really what happened. At least, not completely. See, one of the things that threw me off was Simmons' crazy ravings near the finale of his fight, saying stuff like Ada belonged to him and he loved her. I thought he was confusing Ada and Carla, thinking he was actually fighting his wife disguised as Ada. See, Carla looks to be depicted as his wife or some sort of romantic partner in the photos presented of her. The truth is that Simmons, being part of this Illuminati-style organization known as the Family, had worked well with Ada in the past and became romantically obsessed with her. Carla was merely a young student he had hired to work on his bioorganic weapon experiments, refining Umbrella's weapons technology to create an all-new strain of virus. During this time, he had placed her in charge of Project Ada, a project whose entire purpose was to create another Ada Wong in an effort to feed his obsession. After multiple failures, he had used Carla as a test subject, and finally managed to create a clone of Ada Wong. For all intents and purposes, Carla thought she was Ada, at least for a while, until she finally started to break down and fall victim to separate personalities. She did want revenge against both Simmons and Ada, but Ada had never been involved with Neo Umbrella. The Ada clone wasn't to create a patsy, but was created out of some romantic obsession. In the end, Ada's whole purpose in this entire endeavor isn't to clean up something she is partially responsible for, but to simply clear her own name. Which is funny that she'd blow up and destroy the evidence of her being innocent, seeing as there is little reason for, say, Chris Redfield to believe there was more than one Ada. Each campaign has their own narrative failures, but Ada's is nothing but failure. It is supposed to make sense of everything, but unless you manage to find all of those damned badges, you won't actually have a clue what's going on. The campaign gives no information at all as to who Carla is, especially to Simmons, or how Ada knows either of them in the first place. Chances are your mind will start filling in the blanks on your own, and it will make so much logical sense that you will be wrong. The truth is that the story would make more sense without Ada's involvement, if Simmons simply had a partner that took things too far, or if things simply went out of his control. The only real purpose of Ada's campaign and story is to fetishize her. She's cool and sexy with horribly written one-liners designed to make her seem clever. All those heavy romantic undertones in Leon's campaign see absolutely no payoff for Ada, as she's just too much woman for him or something, I don't even know really. Of course, Ada simply doesn't work as a protagonist, or at least not as an interesting one. In every other campaign, the characters had to face some personal challenge and were forced to grow and develop. Yet Ada has no such internal conflict. She's the same at the end as she was in the beginning, and this is further emphasized by her accepting a phone call and taking another job. It's not even presented in some tragic way, reflecting that Ada cannot get close to anyone with her current lifestyle. Ada is a shell of a character, which makes me wonder why they forced us to spend so much time with her at all. Leading up to its release, Capcom was stating with pride that Resident Evil 6 was the largest game they've developed to date, with well over 600 people all working on it. This number is supposed to be impressive, but the end product simply proves that you don't want to have too many cooks in the kitchen. Resident Evil 6 was a much less enjoyable game than its predecessors, or even its handheld sibling Resident Evil Revelations, simply because it lacked a clear focus. The only real goal in mind was that it had to be big, it had to be bombastic, and it needed to appeal to as many players as possible. Instead, you have a game that will never fully appeal to anyone. The action simply isn't as good as the other games. The information on brawling is poorly communicated, and the horror is completely absent from the allegedly horrifying scenes. If Capcom had stepped back and decided Resident Evil 6 was going to just be one of these campaigns, and then built everything from the ground up for it, the end product would have been much better, a lot less expensive, and would have made a lot more people happy.